There is a sentence so ordinary, so automatic, that most people say it the way they say good morning, without thinking, without weighing it, without once considering what it quietly does to the architecture of their financial life. You have said it. I have said it. Millions of people wake up and say it before they even brush their teeth. It slips out at the grocery store, at the dinner table, in group chats, in the small, disappointed silence between checking your bank balance and putting your phone back in your pocket. It feels like honesty. It feels like you are simply describing what is. But in the tradition I have spent my life studying, a tradition that has produced a disproportionate number of the world's most enduring wealthy families across centuries of displacement, persecution, and loss, this sentence is not considered description at all. It is considered construction. And what it constructs, quietly and obediently, is exactly what you are trying to escape. My name is Ezra Wachtfogel. I am 71 years old. I was born in a cold apartment in a neighborhood that smelled of old wood and boiled cabbage, to a father who repaired watches, and a mother who kept meticulous records of every penny the family spent in a ledger she called the memory of the house. I have spent 4 decades studying the financial linguistics of prosperous Jewish families, not in the abstract, not as academic exercise, but as a living, breathing investigation that began when I was 9 years old and asked my great-aunt Perla why some people in our community had nothing, while others, who had arrived with nothing, now had everything. Her answer took me 40 years to fully understand, but when I finally understood it, I could not unknow it. And I cannot in good conscience keep it from you. Before I give you the phrase, and I will give it to you precisely and completely, because vagueness has never served anyone, I need you to understand the mechanism, not because I want to delay you, but because a phrase without a mechanism is just noise. And what I am about to share with you is not noise. It is, if you take it seriously and apply it with the consistency it requires, one of the most quietly radical things you will ever add to your daily life. Let us begin with what language actually does. In the Western intellectual tradition, we tend to treat words as labels. The tree exists. The word tree is a sticker we put on it so we can discuss it with other people. The word follows the thing. The thing precedes the word. Language, in this framework, is a reporting system. It describes a reality that exists independently of it. This is not wrong exactly, but it is profoundly incomplete. In the Hebraic tradition, and this is not mysticism, this is linguistics, this is psychology, this is something that modern cognitive science has been slowly catching up to for the last 30 years. Language does not merely report. Language constructs. Language shapes. Language, spoken with the full weight of the speaker behind it, has a generative function that is at least as powerful as its descriptive function. And in the domain of human psychology and human action, arguably more powerful. The Hebrew word davar means both word and thing, not coincidentally. The scholars who preserved that linguistic connection across millennia were not confused about vocabulary. They were making a philosophical claim that is held up under scrutiny. The things you name consistently, you summon. The things you describe yourself as, you become. The states you declare in the present tense, your nervous system, your perception, your decision-making apparatus, and ultimately your material circumstances, begin to organize themselves around. When you say, I am broke, you are not reporting a condition. You are issuing an instruction. I want to tell you about a man named Tobias Grinspan, who was a cloth merchant in Krakow in the early part of the last century. Tobias lost everything twice, once to fire once to economic collapse. After the first loss, he rebuilt within 2 years. After the second loss, he rebuilt within 18 months. His neighbors, who had experienced similar losses, largely did not rebuild. They survived, but they did not thrive. They moved through the rest of their lives in a kind of permanent crouch, waiting for the next blow. When Tobias was very old, a journalist from a community newspaper asked him the obvious question. He said something that has been passed down in our community ever since, and which I first heard from my great-aunt Perla when I was 9 years old, sitting on her kitchen floor, eating a piece of bread with butter while she ironed shirts. He said, "I never permitted myself the luxury of describing myself as ruined, because the moment I described myself as ruined, the description would become the assignment. The description becomes the assignment." Read that again. Let it land. Because here is what most people do not understand about the phrase, "I'm broke." It is not just a financial report. It is an identity claim. And the human mind, your mind, my mind, every mind, has a deep cellular drive to protect and validate its stated identity. When you say, "I'm broke," repeatedly, over days, over weeks, over years, your subconscious mind does not argue with you. It does not offer counter-evidence. It says, "Understood. I will now filter your perception, organize your attention, and guide your decisions in the direction that confirms this identity." It will cause you to overlook opportunities. It will cause you to make risk-averse decisions that foreclose growth. It will cause you to project an energy in social and professional situations that subtly repels the very circumstances that could change your condition. You are not cursed by fate. You are, in the most literal and neurological sense, cursed by your own vocabulary. I need to be honest with you about something. I resisted this understanding for years. I was a rational young man. I had been educated in rigorous institutions. I found the idea that words could change bank balances to be, frankly, embarrassing. The kind of thing that credulous people told each other in difficult times to feel better. A sophisticated superstition dressed in religious language. And then I watched my great-uncle Nachman demonstrate it so consistently across so many years that I could no longer rationalize my skepticism. Nachman Wachtvogel was not a man of great formal education. He had emigrated with the equivalent of $40 and a single suitcase. He spoke accented English that people sometimes found difficult to follow. He worked in a textile warehouse. He was, by every external measure, a man who should have remained poor, who had all the structural disadvantages that economic theorists point to as the predictors of perpetual lower-class membership. By the time he was 50, he owned 3 properties. I watched him carefully. I spent summers with him as a teenager, specifically because I was trying to understand what he was doing differently. And the thing that I noticed, which seemed too small to matter, which I initially dismissed as mannerism, was that Nachman never, under any circumstances, spoke negatively about his financial condition. Even in genuinely difficult periods, and there were genuinely difficult periods, he did not describe himself as struggling, as strapped, as behind, as overwhelmed. He had a particular phrase he used instead, a phrase he said he had inherited from his own father, who had inherited it from his father, who had used it in a village that no longer existed, in a country that had reorganized itself several times since then. The phrase had traveled through generations of scarcity and survival, and improbable resilience. And it had arrived intact in Nachman's mouth, in a warehouse, in a mid-sized American city, being used quietly but consistently to build a small, solid, undeniable fortune. Before I give you the phrase, I want to describe what I've witnessed it do, because the phrase is simple, deceptively simple. You may hear it and think, that's it? And if you have that reaction, I understand it. I had the same reaction when Nachman first told me, when I pressed him, when I finally asked directly. I thought there would be more. A ritual, a prayer, a sequence of steps. Instead, he said it quietly, a single sentence, and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has given someone something valuable and is now waiting to see whether they have the discernment to recognize it. What I've watched this phrase do over 40 years of observation and counseling. I watched a woman named Devorale Silberstrom, who had been unemployed for 11 months and was 3 weeks from losing her apartment, begin using this phrase. Within 6 weeks, she had 2 job offers. She took the better one. Within a year, she had negotiated a salary she had never previously considered worth asking for. I watched a young man named Feivel Morgenstern, who had accumulated significant debt in his 20s and described himself as financially cursed, adopt this phrase and abandon his poverty vocabulary entirely. Within 4 months, he had restructured his debt, started a side business, and experienced what he described as a total reorganization of how he perceived his own future. I watched an elderly couple, Rivka and Shimshon Lebovitz, married 50 years, who had reached retirement with almost no savings and were deeply frightened, begin saying this phrase together every morning before breakfast. Within a year, circumstances had shifted sufficiently that their fear had transformed into something more like pragmatic confidence. Not wealth, not immediately, but movement. Unmistakable, undeniable movement in the direction of stability. These are not miracles. I do not deal in miracles. These are the predictable outcomes of a shift in self-concept, in attentional focus, in the subtle but enormously consequential signals that we broadcast to everyone around us through the words we habitually use to describe ourselves. Here is the phrase. When you are tempted to say, "I'm broke," when the bill arrives, when the invitation comes that you cannot afford to accept, when you check your account and feel the floor drop out from under you, you say this instead. Abundance is already moving toward me. Let me say it again so it settles properly. Abundance is already moving toward me. Not I hope abundance will come, not someday I will have more, not I am trying to manifest a better financial situation. Those phrases contain doubt, distance, passivity. They place the thing you want in an indefinite future, separated from you by uncertainty. Abundance is already moving toward me is present tense. It is declarative. It claims that the movement, the shift, the change, the incoming tide is not theoretical. It is already in progress. You are not wishing. You are reporting a movement that is real, that has already begun, that is oriented toward you with the same certainty that a river is oriented toward the sea. This phrase does something specific in the mind. It creates what psychologists call expectant attention. When you are expecting something, when you genuinely believe something is on its way to you, you notice things you would otherwise filter out. You see the job posting you would have scrolled past. You accept the invitation to the gathering where you will meet the person who will change your professional trajectory. You have the conversation you would have avoided. You ask the question you would have swallowed. Your whole perceptual apparatus reorganizes itself around finding the confirmation of the thing you expect to arrive. And then the confirmation arrives. And then you have evidence. And then the belief deepens. And the deepened belief creates more expectant attention, and the cycle accelerates. This is not magic. This is the mechanics of the human mind, understood and encoded and passed down across generations by a people who had to find ways to rebuild prosperity without inherited land, without institutional support, without the structural advantages that most wealth accumulation theories take as baseline assumptions. They had only their minds, and they learned, with extraordinary precision, how to use them. Now I want to address the objection you are already forming. You are thinking, this is just positive thinking. This is just telling myself a comfortable lie while my rent is due. I understand why it looks like that from the outside. But I want to draw your attention to a distinction that is crucial, and that most people who dismiss this principle have failed to make. Positive thinking, in its naive form, asks you to pretend that a problem does not exist. It asks you to replace accurate perception with fantasy. I'm broke becomes, I am fabulously wealthy, which is in fact a lie, and which your nervous system knows is a lie, and which therefore carries no conviction and produces no change. That is not what this phrase does. Abundance is already moving toward me does not deny your present condition. It does not claim you have money you do not have. It claims something different, that the direction of travel has already reversed, that the tide has already turned, even if the water has not yet reached your feet. That movement is in progress, regardless of what the current snapshot looks like. This is a claim about trajectory, not about current position. And trajectory is something you actually have the power to alter, beginning right now, with the quality of your attention and the discipline of your language. When Tobias Greenspan said he would not permit himself the luxury of describing himself as ruined, he was not deluding himself about the ashes of his warehouse. He was refusing to assign himself an identity that would organize his subsequent choices around confirming the ruins. He saw the ruins clearly. He simply declined to become them in language. And in declining, he preserved the part of his psychology that could build again. That is not denial. That is sophisticated psychological self-management. And in the Jewish tradition, it is considered not just a useful technique, but an obligation, a form of stewardship over the instrument of creation that has been placed in your hands. I want to say something about the people who will mock you when you begin using this phrase. They exist in every social circle. They are often people you love, people who love you, people who are speaking from genuine concern. When your bank account is visibly low and you say out loud with conviction, "Abundance is already moving toward me," there will be people who look at you with worry or with amusement, who tell you to be realistic, who say that you are not helping yourself by refusing to face facts. I want you to notice something about those people. Notice how they talk about money. Notice the phrases they use. Notice whether they consistently describe themselves and their lives in the language of scarcity. Tight, stretched, barely, never enough, always something, can't catch a break. Notice whether their financial lives reflect a pattern that their language might be quietly constructing. I am not asking you to be unkind to these people. I am asking you to notice the correlation, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, you will stop taking your financial vocabulary advice from people whose financial vocabulary has been shaping a financial reality you do not want. The people in our tradition who preserved and transmitted this understanding were not living in abundance when they first learned it. Many of them were living in genuine, pressing, urgent scarcity. They used the phrase not because things were good, but precisely because things were not good, and they understood that things would remain not good as long as they kept speaking the language that produced and perpetuated the not good. They used it as an act of defiance, a refusal to let external circumstances dictate the internal narrative. And that defiance, repeated consistently, held through mockery and doubt and the long weeks when nothing visible had yet changed, was the engine of transformation. Let me tell you what the first 30 days will look like, because I want you to be prepared and not surprised into abandoning the practice before it has time to root. In the first week, you will catch yourself constantly. You will be mid-sentence. I can't go, and you will stop. You will feel slightly absurd. You will feel like you are performing a script that does not yet feel like yours. This is expected. This is what the beginning of every real change feels like. The awkwardness is not a sign that it is not working. It is a sign that your old pattern is recognizing the challenge. Say the phrase anyway. Say it quietly if you need to. Say it in your car. Say it in the bathroom with the door closed. You do not have to announce it to the room. You have to say it to yourself, with enough conviction to mean it, every single time you would otherwise have spoken poverty into the air. In the second week, something will begin to shift internally, a small warming, a faint sense of something loosening that had been held tight for a long time. Some people describe it as hope, though it is different from ordinary hope, less fragile, more directional, more like the feeling of a train that has started moving slowly and is building velocity. In the third week, most people begin to notice external movement, not always money directly, often something adjacent, an unexpected call, an idea that has been sitting dormant that suddenly seems worth pursuing, a reconnection with someone who turns out to be relevant, a door that opens where you had stopped expecting doors. The language shift is producing an attention shift, and the attention shift is producing action, and the action is producing results. By the end of 30 days, you will have evidence. Not overwhelming, possibly, not the end of all difficulty, but evidence, small, clear, undeniable, that the relationship between your words and your circumstances is not coincidental. And evidence at that point does something that motivation alone cannot. It makes the practice self-sustaining. You do not have to convince yourself anymore. You have seen it. It works because you have watched it work. And because you have watched it work, you believe it more fully. And because you believe it more fully, it works more powerfully. This is the cycle that the Wachtfogels and the Grinchbans and the Zilberstrom families have passed down. Not as theology, not as superstition, as practical technology. One final thing, and it is perhaps the most important. When abundance arrives, and it will, in forms you cannot predict from where you are standing now, you must receive it explicitly. Do not let it pass unremarked. Do not let it arrive silently and disappear into the background noise of daily life. When the unexpected check comes, when the offer materializes, when the opportunity presents itself, stop. Say out loud or write it down or speak it to the empty room. This is the abundance that was already moving toward me. It has arrived. More is on its way. This is not performance. This is calibration. You are training your system, your subconscious, your perception, your belief, to recognize abundance when it appears, rather than filtering it out or minimizing it or absorbing it without acknowledgement into a baseline narrative of scarcity that remains unchanged. Every acknowledgement of arrival is also an invitation. Every moment of recognized abundance widens the channel through which more abundance can flow. This is why gratitude is not just a pleasant habit. It is a functional practice with measurable consequences. The mind that notices what is working, what is arriving, what is moving in the right direction, finds more of those things. Not through mystical mechanism, but through the thoroughly documented neurological reality that we find what we are looking for. We perceive what we expect to perceive, and we move toward what we habitually describe as real. Nachman Wachtfogel, who had arrived with $40 and a single suitcase, died at the age of 87, with a particular piece of a man who had settled a long-running argument with the universe. Not because the universe had given him everything, but because he had understood, earlier than most, that the universe tends to give us more of what we declare. And he had been very careful, for a very long time, about what he declared. He never said he was broke. Not in the warehouse years, not in the lean years, not in the years when the properties needed expensive repairs and the market was unfavorable. And reasonable men would have described themselves as stretched thin and barely holding on. He said instead, with the quiet conviction of a man who has tested a principle and found it sound, "Abundance is already moving toward me." And it was. It always was. Begin today, not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve slightly and the phrase feels slightly less like a stretch. Today. The next time you feel the old sentence forming in your chest, the familiar, comfortable, self-defeating sentence that you have been saying so long it feels like the truth, stop it before it reaches your lips. Replace it with the phrase. Say it with your shoulders back and your eyes open, and the faint, determined beginning of belief. You are not broke. You are standing in the interval between the declaration and the arrival. That interval is not permanent. That interval is, in fact, already closing. Abundance is already moving toward you. It has been waiting for you to stop saying otherwise.